Thank you everybody for joining the first of our 2025 EAZA Animal Welfare webinars. My name's Ellen Williams. I'm going to be the host today. Apologies that we're slightly delayed. We just had a few little technical difficulties, but we are ready to go now. So thank you for joining. A little bit of housekeeping before we begin. You are very welcome to have your videos on, but please do remain on mute during the presentation. Just for simplicity's sake. And then what we'll do is we've got a 45-minute presentation with 15 minutes of questions at the end. If you do have a question, please send that to me using the chat function during the webinar, and then I will collate them and invite you to ask your question at the end, or I can ask your question on your behalf if you prefer. Sal Binding is our fabulous tech person today, so please do make a note of her details. So if you need to get in touch with her, if you get booted out for any reason, then you can do so. Okay, without further ado, I'm absolutely delighted today to introduce Emily Hanley. Emily is a lead keeper on the Asian elephant team at ZSL Whipsnade Zoo. Emily's sort of interest in animal welfare has really been fueled by seeing the positive impact that evidence-based decisions can have on the care and the management of animals. And Emily's particularly interested in sort of really encouraging keepers at all stages of their careers to nurture that sort of proactive and critical mindset towards how we care for our animals. She's going to be talking to us today about the importance of not just caring for our animals during the daytime when we can see them, but also looking at this throughout a 24-hour period and really focusing on the various different aspects of positive animal welfare. So I will hand over now to Emily. Thank you so much, Emily, for your time and joining us today. We're really looking forward to your talk.
Thank you so much, Ellen, and thank you everyone for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you all here and really just share where my team have come from in terms of starting this new kind of journey, so to speak, in terms of really getting evidence to really push for welfare where we can, but also very much to share with you that this is still a work in progress. So again, a little bit about me, as Ellen so beautifully introduced me, thank you very much, or the overview of today's talk, but just a bit of context about my background, where I've come from, because I think it will really help if any of you are out there and you're thinking, okay, we haven't necessarily started data collection, or maybe we're really early in the data collection process as a team, that you don't necessarily need to have a background in research, data collection, everything like that, which can sometimes be a bit overwhelming. So as Ellen mentioned, I'm lead keeper at Whipsnade Zoo on the elephant team, but my background had nothing to do with research or data collection. It was very much working my way up practically through the job of being, you know, all the way from an apprentice keeper to lead. So when it came to data collection, it was fascinating, and I could really see the importance of it and where it could drive our welfare forward. But it was really new to me, and I'm still learning, in all honesty. So just for any of you out there that are kind of in a similar position, hopefully this talk will give you an insight or reassurance that really, if you just start small, and as a team, really the main thing is to have that collective mindset that this is a beneficial thing. It might take more time and a bit more resources to implement it into our day-to-day work, but we don't have to think, oh, I don't have a background in this. It can still be really beneficial. So lead keeper at Whipsnade Zoo, but also I've been really lucky to be or to join the EAZA Animal Welfare Working Group relatively recently. So I'm really excited to again collaborate and kind of gain information myself from fellow members. But how I managed to join that wonderful group was I was one of 4 instructors, EAZA Academy instructors, for the animal welfare assessment. And again, it was really nice to come in as a keeper for those workshops. So we've gone to 2 different zoos across the EAZA collections, sharing this workshop in how to implement welfare assessments. But my 3 other fellow collaborators or colleagues, they very much do have a fantastic background in research and welfare, and so my position in that team was to share very practical ways to apply that information and that work as a keeper, how do we make it realistic and feasible as well. So hopefully we'll get a snapshot of how we've implemented similar practices on our elephant team. So again, why take data or conduct data collection for welfare? So our prior management practices really only gave us a snapshot of the elephant's behaviour and therefore level of welfare. When we took a step back and really thought about it, we only see them for roughly 8 hours a day out of 24 hours. And I'm sure you're aware, but if you're not too aware of how long elephants sleep for, it's only a few hours a night. So that's a huge proportion of their 24-hour experience that we were really observing and that we understood. So we really kind of were trying to think of how can we get evidence and collect data to really understand the herd more broadly and understand them more widely. Also with elephants specifically, there is licensing and guidelines, the EAZA guidelines, licensing that's come through, which is only a positive thing, of course, to push and drive positive change in welfare. But the specific requirements for elephants is that we do conduct these behavioural observations regularly and provide that evidence to show that we are trying to increase behaviour change, welfare changes for the better. But regardless of the requirements, of course, we therefore have to do these behaviour observations and collect data. What we really found was if we didn't have to have that drive coming from licensing and guidelines, it's so invaluable that we would continue to collect the data itself. So what we have gained, even in the early stages where, as I mentioned at the start, we are still very much evolving, we are learning as we go in terms of what actually gives us valuable results and how to really conduct this data correctly, because again our backgrounds very much are not in that realm, but what we have discovered is that it has given us so much food for thought and actually has changed our management in ways that I will go into detail later on. But without having done that work, we probably would have stagnated and not known the reasons why certain behaviours were being displayed, or they weren't necessarily displaying natural behaviours, that a range of natural behaviours that they could. So what was missing from our information about the herd? Really, we know our animals as keepers. We see them every day. We're of course so intertwined with their lives, and we think about them a huge amount of our day. But there is still a lot of information that we did not know. So activity time budget, that included engagement with enrichment. As a keeper myself, I know the feeling that you're really proud of this bit of enrichment that you've made. You've strived to build it, think about it, implement it into the space, and maybe the first 10 minutes you get to see them engage with it, and then otherwise you're a little none the wiser as to the effectiveness of that enrichment if you can't see them throughout the night, throughout the morning as well. So we really wanted to understand, was the enrichment that we're putting in achieving the aims that we set out for? Enclosure use, so are we encouraging them to move around their space, seek opportunities or resources in different areas? Is that happening whilst we're not there? And also with that, we'll come on to social dynamics later, but are multiple elephants getting, or the whole herd, I should say, getting equal opportunities to engage with enrichment or resources around their enclosure? Natural feeding behaviours, are they, touched on this briefly, but are they displaying a range of natural feeding behaviours, from using their prehensile trunk, stripping logs, debarking logs, things like that, that we might not observe during the night, because we wouldn't have known if we can see their behaviour throughout the night. Social behaviour, so is that affiliative or agonistic, is that affecting their behavior in the daytime? So again, that snapshot that we were observing between the working hours, it gives us context for any changes that we might have seen. I'll go into more detail specifically in the later slides, but for example, we have recently gone through quite a shift in our herd dynamic in terms of the herd actually having to split into two. So leading up to that very obvious split that they showed in their behavior, it could, from doing data collection, we could see and track the changes that was happening between those kind of two family groups as well. So it was really important and really good evidence to say, look, we could see this happening, let's take action or plan for the two herds being split. Sleep, we'll go into this again in its own slide, but really a multitude of things that we could gain from this, not just in terms of health benefits or indications that there's a health concern. For example, if they're preferring constantly to sleep on one side, sounds very simple, but it could indicate that there is a health or pain on the other side, for example. But again, it goes back to social dynamics, who's sharing the space with others, who is deciding to take themselves off and sleep elsewhere. But as well as that being interesting, what do we do about it, and how can we provide kind of equal opportunities for their preferences, which I'll go into more detail later. And anticipatory or stereotypical behaviours. Now, we might observe these during the day or kind of when we first come in the morning, for example. How long have they been happening for? Do we know that they've just started as keepers arrive, kind of anticipating our arrival? Or have they been waiting at the gate for hours for our arrival? Those questions were very much prevalent in our mind. And at that point, we just didn't have the answers before data collection. So very briefly, just to give you an idea of how we collected the data, we started basic with paper and transferring that information onto Excel observations. So it was quite time consuming in the early days, where we would kind of have someone with a sheet of paper looking through daytime observations and nighttime observations on the paper, and then having to transfer that over to Excel to collate the data. But we have since moved on to Zoo Monitor. This might be something that you're very familiar with, or maybe some of you kind of haven't quite explored this before. This is not an advertisement necessarily for Zoo Monitor, no affiliations to it, but just this is how we collect data, and it has really streamlined our observation or the way we collect the information. And if you wanted to go have more information, they do have a website. Of course, you can go and explore a little bit more. But I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, if anyone knows, it is free to use for certain organisations. So might need to delve a little bit deeper in terms of that. But this is what we use to collect data, and it's a really quick way to mark any observations that we observe. Just an indication of how we check their behaviour overnight. We do have the luxury of having CCTV cameras. Later on, I will talk about the challenges that are faced with, of course, implementing this, the cost of CCTV or cameras, making it feasible. So I'll share with you how we conduct our data collection, but I'm very aware that there might be ways that it will kind of, you can start on a smaller scale and build up. So we will discuss that later. But we use CCTV cameras that are inside and outside. So if, again, we're not there overnight, we can observe them. But also if we want to go back and observe something that's happened in the daytime, that allows us to do so as well. Okay, so of all the things that I mentioned at the start in terms of the questions that we had, what was missing, I've just taken a select few of those topics just to delve a little bit deeper and show you or tell you how we collect that data, or what we look for, and then also what we've gained and what we've done as a result, and how it's impacted our management practice. So for sleep, we've got a lovely photo there of it's a bit blurry, but once you get your eye in, you can notice there's an adult elephant at the front, and then you've got mum at the back next to a mound, and then you've got the little 𝗃𝗺 that's snuggled into her belly as well. So as much as these observations are very important, it's very sweet to observe their sleep as well. So just enjoy that. So the data that we collect through their sleep observations is their social proximity. Again, who's sleeping with who's deciding to take themselves off potentially to the other side, or even outside as well. So that might indicate to us, okay, so we need to provide equal opportunities for the same substrate to be in different areas. They do choose, as you'll see in a short video later on, to choose to sleep on mounds. So we need to provide those in different areas for the individuals that might take themselves off. So social proximity, and also that indicates if there's been any changes, because for a long time we would see that they would sleep as pretty much a whole herd, and then with the change in dynamics, as I mentioned, we did notice that a particular individual and her calf would start to kind of almost ostracize herself, but choose to sleep separately. So that could give us early indications of that change. We were able to note down where the preferences for individual elephants were to sleep. So was there a pattern into favorite areas to go down and have deep rest? And to do that, we split the cow barn in this particular instance, the indoor space for the elephants, into a grid system. So that means when it went on to Excel, or how we were collecting the data, we could specifically pinpoint the preferred locations and get a really clear pattern or trend indication there. We took down the time that they would go down, the duration, and also the bouts. So going on to reasons for waking, is that something we're providing and it's actually interrupting their behavior, their sleep? We did notice that we have hay nets on staggered timing, so they come down at different hours of the night and early morning, and for a period of time we'd programmed them to come down at a time and it was interrupting their sleep. So purely by observing this, we could change our management and just tweak it so that it wasn't interrupting their sleep. Also, going back to 𝗃𝗺, who is our calf, again snuggled up on her mum's belly there, she was a reason for waking the herd quite often. So as joyful as that might sound to watch, it is quite sweet. It is also quite important, especially in the early days. I will go on to explain a little bit of a specific, almost case study, if you will, of Luca, who is the elephant at the front there, lying down. We noticed that she hadn't lied down to rest for quite a long period when 𝗃𝗺 was born. So that was a big change in the herd, the birth of a calf. Luca is not the mum. She's just a very fantastic honorary auntie. But that was really important for us to monitor and check that she was getting chance to rest. They can rest standing up, of course, but she was not going down. So I will go into more detail in a moment on that, but again, an indication reason why they're being woken was really important as well. Chosen side, I've mentioned this briefly, but is it an indication of a health concern? So are they always choosing to sleep on one side? If so, that would lead us to investigate and do some health investigations with health checks. And also choice, would they prefer to sleep inside or outside? So that kind of goes back to location. Do they have a preferred reason for that? But again, it's all a bit of a melting pot and a bit of a soup. Does that indicate that one elephant is choosing to sleep outside, or is there a social reason there? Are they being displaced out to outside, and do they have a chance, an opportunity to come in? So a lot of things to gather, but again, going back to what we've gained, and we've kind of explored these points already, but just going through how it actually allowed us to change what we were doing. So in terms of environmental factors, again, how can we provide equal opportunity? So we have noticed that they prefer to sleep on mounds, but knowing the social dynamic, when they were one herd before the split, it made us change the topography and the range of mounds, the location of mounds, for them to have a comfortable place to choose to sleep, but also not putting them in a position where they are forced to go down near elephants that were potentially more dominant, or actually what we found if they didn't have an opportunity elsewhere is that they would only rest standing up, so they didn't feel comfortable enough to go down. So that really allowed us to change the environment to help their sleep preferences. Social groupings, again, it allowed us to monitor the changes, because the build up to the split in the herd, for example, was very, very slow. There were indications, but it gradually amounted to the split. So we were able to track any changes, but also it was a learning curve for us, because we were able to go back and see where it began. Was there anything that we missed as well? So again, it is a really good learning tool for if something big happens, to go back and you've got the evidence there for you. Also, just briefly, it was a fantastic change in the way that we could understand our herd, because it was the first time we could observe them without us being there. So I'm sure you as keepers have all experienced the change in behavior that we bring. Sometimes we mean food, we mean training, we mean lots of different things for our animals in our care. So we were able to see the dynamic of the herd without the presence of keepers. So that was really, really important. So just to give you, as I'm talking about those specific stories, a cute little snapshot is sped up. So she's not doing much, but Paya is right in the middle there, and she's just sat on her mum. I just thought that would be really sweet for you guys to see whilst I'm talking away at you about the data, which can sometimes be not it can sometimes be a heavy topic. So I'll try that again. Oh, there we go. So she sat on mum there. It's not letting me play her again, but there we go. So we mentioned Luca, who's this female here right at the front, honorary auntie. So we were able to track her sleep. I won't go into too much detail about this one because we've already touched upon it, but we were monitoring the fact that for roughly 2 months, give or take, she was not going down and having deep sleep, lying down. She was just doing standing rest. So this, if it were to continue, we would need to monitor Luca's health. Were there any changes in her behavior from not getting deep sleep? Luckily, it didn't amount to anything, but again, it gave us something to track and monitor just from doing observations. And I can confirm that Paya was a big reason for many of the elephants being woken up as well. Not just Geeta, the mum there, is doing a very good job trying to probably feign sleep there, but Paya would run all over them, flap their ears back and forth as well. So it's quite entertaining. So this is just a really brief indication that they do love to flop down onto mounds. So just an example there of their choice to sleep next to their preferred elephant. So actually the elephant that just went down there was Geeta, and she's just chosen to sleep next to her mum. So we would track where that is on the location grid. Has she chosen to sleep up against a mound or on the flat, and who she's chosen to sleep next to. So again, just some nice footage there of what we're looking at. And you can see actually also when we come back to challenges of how we actually collect this data and make sure that it's correct. It's quite difficult to identify as well. So you really have to take the time as a team to be able to confidently identify animals in the dark as well. So that's one other thing. Moving on though, in terms of what we gained from these observations, natural feeding behaviours and social dynamics of the herd. So focusing on the natural feeding behaviours, before we were doing these observations, we would present the diets, thinking, that they're really going to last a long time. Again, elephants eat for about 16 to 18 hours a day. So we're thinking, okay, the way we've presented this diet, whether it be hay nets or logs for them to debark or browse, a pile of browse, that's really going to fill that time budget for feeding. But we didn't know. We had no evidence. We were assuming that they were busy throughout that 16 hours to 18 hours. So we also wanted to know Are they getting equal opportunities? So we know naturally there will be displacement occurring in a herd. There will be a hierarchy. So the submissive elephants that are displaced, are they getting an opportunity to seek food elsewhere? That was a question we posed. And also on the flip side, is there any way that we can encourage social feeding opportunities? Because once we started conducting the observations and collating our data, we realised that they were very capable of moving each other off of hay nets. So that was our primary way of presenting their diet. At this point, the browse presentation was simply a pile of browse in one location. And that would be, they would take a piece, walk away with it, and it would be finished within a matter of half an hour, potentially 40 minutes if you're lucky. So really the hay nets were the things throughout the night that was were their primary source of seeking food. And they very much were capable of continuously displacing each other. And we actually had at the time a carousel of 3 elephants that would, in a triangle, displace one another and just go around and kind of move each other off. So from that, we were able to say, okay, number one, we need to work on how can we slow down the feeding time budget when it comes to the browse pile. Can we include a social feeding opportunity there for the group to experience feeding alongside one another? And also, are we providing enough for that carousel of elephants? When an elephant is moved off, and they find other food sources? So it changed our management practices. We had multiple hay nets down in different locations at any one time, rather than one hay net coming down at staggered intervals. And in terms of the log pile, in terms of I gave it away there. In terms of the browse provision, a simple idea, it seems. We added a log pile on top of the browse, so heavy logs chopped up on top of the browse. And from observations, we could see that extended their time feeding at this resource for hours over the night. It was also equal opportunity. We saw social feeding opportunities from submissive and dominant elephants feeding at the same browse pile at the same time. So we rarely, if ever, would ever see that. So it was just a really nice example from gaining that information, what we could actually do about it and how that was improving their natural feeding behaviours. So these were very early days day findings from our data, but it's just an observation or indication, I should say, into it doesn't have to be incredibly complex. Again, our background, just to remind you, if you've just joined, as a team, our background is not research and data collection. We've learnt, and we've also sought help and guidance from expertise, but we started small. So here you can see that we just wanted to compare the time or duration it would take for elephants feeding at a single hay net compared to a double hay net. And that was just simply putting another hay net on top around the original hay net. Something really simple, but putting it in is one thing, seeing the results is the other thing. And you can see that all 4 elephants in this case, it pretty much doubled their the duration that they were feeding from those hay nets, which was lovely to see. Also, going back to that log pile, the implementation of log piles, here it's a little bit forward actually. So we, unfortunately, this will come back to challenges or how to implement it. So we'll talk about this more later on. We hadn't taken data when it was just a pile of browse. So in hindsight, is always a thing. We didn't have any baseline information about the browse file that was put in before we added the logs. That was purely anecdotal, that we knew that it was finished quickly, because quite often when we were going to close the house and the end of the day, it had finished. So we were confident in that knowledge, but we didn't have baseline data to provide that. So these graphs are or charts are a little bit ahead, where we were experimenting with having one log pile as opposed to 2, just to experiment with, you know, equal opportunities and so forth. So we could see there that it actually depended on individuals there as well. So oh, it's covering whose color is whose for me, but you can see whoever's purple really did commit and persevered, whereas the others kind of fluctuated a little bit more in this case. But just an indication of a really simple question: what was the duration, the difference in duration, and then also making it individual so we could see if one elephant, for example, didn't persevere with this log pile, for example. This was just a video of the log pile. Again, the videos are a little blurry because it is nighttime CCTV, but hopefully it gives you a little snapshot there of as a herd, even Pi is getting involved and she's not being pushed off by the adults because the space is too large to dominate. So that was a really lovely change that we implemented there. Okay, so enrichment evaluations. Again, we mentioned at the start, we are so proud, we endlessly want to encourage those natural behaviours as keepers, don't we? We always think, okay, how can we come up with new, fantastic enrichment ideas? But a lot of the time, including myself, I hold my hands up, you create this enrichment device, you pop it in, and you have no idea other than the first 10 minutes, is it being effective? Is it achieving the aim that we're setting out for?
Perché se la misuri con quello che non funziona.
Oh, sorry, I thought that was a question for a moment. And so most of that is seeking to encourage natural behaviours. I'm sure we all strive for that. But we had an evolution of evaluations. At first, again, it was paper observations in the first 10 minutes that the elephants came in, and did they engage with this enrichment? But again, it was just a snapshot. So when we were able to utilize the CCTV, we were able to see the bouts, the amount of times they go back and forth to this enrichment. Individuals, are all the elephants engaging with this behavior, or was it just Paya? Was it just Beth, the younger elephants in the herd? Were we creating competition? For example, if we were only putting one enrichment device in the space, was it actually creating that conflict there as well? But also in terms of evaluations, we going back to the evolution of our evaluations. In the early days, we would do one evaluation of a new enrichment device and go, done, sorted. So we don't need to evaluate that anymore. It works. But as we evolved, we realized actually something that was really successful before, does it continue to be successful if we put it in for a week or have it in there indefinitely? Does the novelty wane, and therefore is it still meeting our evaluation aims? Social dynamics, so I did that. The other way around, so we've already mentioned that, equal opportunity, our elephants getting the same chance to engage, and also just it actually ties into what we were talking about earlier. It also gave us context for interactions that we might have seen in the day. So if there was a conflict over only one enrichment item being put in, does that impact their behavior in the morning? For example, quite often we do our training sessions in the morning, and 𝗘𝗺𝗆 is one of our elephants, and she's incredibly engaged in training sessions normally. But as going back to that build up to the dynamic shift in the herd, we noticed in her training sessions that she was slightly disengaged and slightly more focused on what is going around her. And although we don't know for certain, we could see a correlation between the change overnight, what was happening in the barn, the change in dynamic in the herd, and that kind of eventual split to become two herds. So that could have impacted her training sessions as well. So again, all food for thought, but we would have been none the wiser had we not conducted these observations. So just a brief look again at the very early days graphs that or charts that we were able to gain from taking this data. So this was in terms of encouraging a natural behaviour of digging. So we knew that Beth, who's one of our younger elephants, she's 8 years old, she is a keen digger. So she really, we've got substrate of sand in the barn. She will really investigate if we've put anything underneath. So we were trying to encourage others to do so as well. So first of all, we put a range of things buried underneath the sand, different depths as well, to make a challenge for Beth, but also maybe to encourage others. I believe, again, the names are covered for me, but I believe at the bottom there with the fire hose that is attached to a deeply buried log underneath the sand, that pink line is 𝗘𝗺𝗆, I believe. And this was amazing because we hadn't seen her engage in digging before, but she really persisted in this behaviour. So that was something we hadn't seen her do during the day, but from the observations, we could kind of work out what would encourage her to engage in this behaviour. And this was actually just an indication. So that was duration, I believe. Yes, duration. And then this one, we also looked at the amount of bouts, because we realized that, okay, is it still successful if they only have a short duration engaging with the enrichment device, but some were going back to the enrichment time and time again throughout the night, but just for short periods of time. So we realized, again, the evolution where we've kind of moved through in our evaluations, that it is also important to think about the amount of times they engage with it as well as time. This is just an example of, so the larger elephant is Beth at 8 years old, and 𝗘𝗺𝗆 is the smaller at 2. So Beth is digging, but you can see she does get frustrated with 𝗘𝗆𝗆 trying to get involved, and she just gets a little kick to the face there. So, poor girl, she goes, okay, I'll go and seek another opportunity. So again, another indication to put not just one opportunity in the space as well, but that was more for your enjoyment, if anything. Okay, so moving on, just checking the time there for you. Moving on to unseen anticipatory behaviours. So we may, as keepers, of course, I know you know your animals inside and out. You do know them, but what we experienced is that we could see that there are some anticipatory, I should also say stereotypical behaviours as well. But we could only observe them when we were there. And something that we noticed, so for example, an older cow in our herd, 𝗘𝗺𝗆𝗆, she would be waiting by the gates moving through to the training area. So our setup at the moment, our facility is their indoor space, and then there's a little raceway that leads to the training area. And we could, although this was an assumption, but we could allude to, in the mornings, the training area is high value. It's stimulation when it comes to training. There's a lot of food reinforcer that takes place in that space. And 𝗘𝗆𝗆 in particular, she only has 2 teeth, so we also increase her opportunity to have hay in that space without the competition of others. So for 𝗘𝗆𝗆, that space was incredibly high value. But we didn't know when this behaviour started. Was it for 5 minutes before we arrived, or was it for hours before we arrived, and she was just, not displaying natural elephant behaviour throughout the night, and then when it came to the morning, she knew that it was training time. So this was something we really wanted to explore and try and discover a way that we can assist her and increase natural behaviours and decrease this undesired behaviour. So again, facility setup, our routine was creating this big event in the morning, and therefore the behaviour, anticipating it. So from conducting our observations, we could tell that it also was to do with when the last hay net was to drop down. So we were able to manage that by providing, again, more hay nets, allowing multiple hay nets to come down in the morning before we arrived, to again allow them to seek more food rather than waiting for the big event of moving through to the training areas. So that was provision of more resources and staggered feeding. Adjustment to facility. Now, this is a big one, and I'm very aware, and we'll come back to this in the challenges part as well, like how do we implement this? Adjustments to facility, we all know it's very hard to make changes in zoos, whether that's funding or whether there's different priority species that are just top of the list at that point. So I am aware this is not feasible at all, but the real takeaway from this presentation, I hope, is really just the change of mindset. Even if we're not able to make a change right now, we're gathering evidence to use to support changes in the future. So if we can just start building up our understanding of what our animals need with the data to back it, then when it does come to a point where it's feasible to make these changes, then you have that at your disposal, rather than, again, going back to the beautiful thing that is hindsight, being in a position where you're trying to fight for a change or an adjustment to your facility, and you have nothing to support you. It's a difficult position to be in. So in our case, we are lucky that there are plans being put into place for adjustments to be made for the elephants exhibit at Whipsnade Zoo. So we are in a really privileged position. But going back to how this information, this data, can inform our decisions and what we as keepers can bring forth to the table of design, which is, you know, sometimes we're included, but there's a lot of moving parts. We did really feel this time round quite valuable because we had evidence to say, okay, ideally, rather than having a separate training area, if we could have a space, the elephant space as whole, and then the training walls. So we work in protected contact. So PC, protected contact training walls built in the space that they're in, and whether that's outside, inside, multiple areas, that means we can try to eliminate that idea of the morning event of them moving through into the training space. And therefore they're building up all this anticipation to go in, and in Kaylee's case, she does display stereotypical behaviour. So can this help mitigate that, particularly for younger elephants? We don't want them to develop those behaviours as well. So that's very far off. I understand it's not always feasible, but it's just that change of mentality. Okay, we've got this evidence. What has it taught us that what we need for our facility? So you're in a position to fight for it if you can. Also, going back to a more manageable change, are there any changes to daily management routines? So we're not there yet in terms of changing our facility, but can we be more flexible in the morning routine, which Kaylee is waiting for? Can we change up when we do training, where we do training, and also can we make both areas of equal value, both the training area and their inside and outside paddocks, for example? So challenges, we've come up a few of them as we've gone along. I'm very aware that as an elephant keeper and an elephant team, it is a very particular position to be in. We have, as we mentioned at the very start, the pressure, which is only a good thing, from legislation and guidelines to enhance elephant welfare. There is kind of a spotlight on elephants at the moment, so that is very much supporting and making it a requirement to do this data collection. I'm aware that pressure might not be there for other species as of yet, so it might be harder to get the green light to go ahead. But I just wanted to briefly talk about potentially ways to make it feasible, even in the early days. Just to go back to starting small, we luckily we did have cameras and we do have CCTV, but talking to other sections at Whipsnade Zoo, even the implementation of camera traps, which might be a slightly, it's a stepping stone to getting CCTV, which might not be feasible for everyone. But are there pieces of equipment that just might give you even more of an indication of what they're doing overnight? If it's not for 24 hours, does it give you any more insight than the 8 hours that you're at work? That is a stepping stone to gaining more data. So in terms of equipment, rather than thinking you need to have the high-end cameras or anything to help you in that way, is there something that's more on a budget that can give you any more information? Time. I am completely aware as a keeper myself that a lot of us will be out there thinking, how on earth do you fit it in our day? And this is something that we found a challenge. Absolutely. We, again, started small. Everything that we've spoken about, from enrichment, evaluations to sleep to social, we did not start taking the data all at the same time at all. So my advice there, you might be in the position where you can, but this is just in case you're looking at it and going, okay, we're starting from scratch. Choose one or two elements. And even within those areas, it can be as precise as you like. So sleep, who's sleeping near who. So it could just be the social aspect, and you can build up from there as well. So I really acknowledge that it takes time and resources, but what we found, the more we could implement, so starting with one thing and then gradually we became faster. That is one thing. You will become faster and more efficient in collecting the data. It becomes part of your day. It's a bit like magic, because you might be thinking, where is that time coming from? But you will find ways, or that's very easy for me to say, but I do truly believe it. As a team, if you're on the same mindset, you will find ways to shift the priority and move this up to equal priority to all the other things that we do as a keeper as well. But the more you do and the more evidence you gain, you can hopefully bring that to powers that be higher up, to show the value in it, and therefore they will hopefully support giving you more resources and more time to conduct more observations. Subjectivity. So again, we all know our animals, but it does come into play in terms of you might have keepers that really want to gain evidence to fight for a particular change, and therefore it might be slightly biased towards gaining certain type of evidence or data. For example, with stereotypical behaviour or use of enclosure, how can we get more for our animals? That's what we're working for, but that is something to be aware of in terms of making your whether it's on paper or whether it's on Zoom Monitor or Excel, the way you collect data as objective as you can. So it takes away that subjectivity. And again, I've briefly mentioned this before, but I'm very aware there will be different challenges when applying this to different species. I can only bring my experience from working with elephants and how we apply this, these ways of collecting data. But I'm aware that if you work with birds or fish or any other species, you may have to, it might not directly apply. And also the topics might not be relevant in terms of, are you looking at their social encounters if they're, a solitary animal. So I'm very aware these things won't necessarily apply for every species, but really my takeaway again is changing the mindset or opening the mindset. Many of you out there are probably already doing some kind of data collection, or you're just very aware that you would like to gain more of an insight. So you're already thinking along these lines. It's, for us, a big thing was to, as a team, get a universal understanding of why it's important. And then you can take all of these things and apply it and tweak it to serve the questions you have about your species, going back to where it all began. For us, it was coming up with questions. What is missing in the information that we know about our animals? Okay, so briefly, I am coming up to the end and now ready for questions. Hopefully we have enough time. So just briefly, collaboration is key. Again, we are very privileged in that we have a research officer, welfare and behaviour officer, 3 excellent colleagues at Whipsnade Zoo or across ZSL. So we have, as people that didn't come with data collection background or research background, been able to learn and gain a lot of information as to how to conduct this through these colleagues. But also, if you don't have that base, those pillars of information in your collection, of course, reaching out to other EAZA or other collections as well. You're more than welcome to reach out to myself, but it's starting small and sharing what has worked and what hasn't worked as well. That evolution in the process. So I hope that was an informative or enjoyable insight to just a snapshot of what we're doing and where we're trying to move towards, because again, we're not perfect at it yet by any stretch of the imagination, and we are continually learning how to be more efficient in the way we're taking data and what is actually relevant as well. So we're learning. We're so happy if you wanted to reach out to us as well for any questions. But yes, thank you so much for listening. And any questions, please feel free to ask. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emily. That was a really fabulous webinar. I've got a few questions that have come through from people who are not able to ask them themselves, and then I've got some that want to come on and ask. So I'll go through some of them. Starting off with, what does an average week of data collection look like in terms of time allocated to data? And then a second question that related to that was, how do you divide data collection? So do you divide it across the team, or is it just a couple of you that are doing that collection?
Both really good questions, because the biggest thing is, how do we implement this? How do you do it? So I'll tell you what we do now, but again, when we've been doing this for maybe a year or two, probably longer now, 2 years. So we definitely were not doing this at the start, but currently in terms of sleep, we do it 2 nights a week, but we do try and do that in 1 session. So once a week, any member of the team. So we do train, everyone is capable. Of course, if we've got an apprentice, we'll just allow them to get really familiar with the individuals of the elephant of the herd to make sure that they're confident in identification. But everyone on the team is trained. So that allows someone takes probably an hour to do 2 nights worth of sleep, and that is very dependent on the quality of your, the cameras that you're working with, because sometimes it will take a little bit longer if it's difficult, but generally 1 hour once a week, and we do 2 nights. Ideally, we would love to do more, but that's where we are, and that's taken us, probably a year to get to that point, alongside other data collection as well. Enrichment evaluations, we try, if you've put the enrichment in, again, everyone is trained as to how to do that, so it's spread across the team from apprentice to lead keeper. If you put the enrichment in, you tend to take the responsibility to undertake that evaluation, but a lot of the time that would take 20 minutes maybe, depending on the enrichment, because if they keep going back to it, it will take longer. But again, that's as and when a new bit of enrichment has been put in, or if you're again going back to something that has previously been evaluated, you might take it upon yourself to say, I want to evaluate the log piles again, for example. So that again is spread across the team and tends to be a much shorter responsibility, dedication in terms of time, but that is as and when. We do pencil it into the diary, I believe about twice a week as a basis, just to try and make sure that it's not forgotten. But if people want to do more, they can. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Now I've just got, I'm going to invite Ord on now to ask questions. Possibly a few questions.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay.
we can. Thank you.
Oh, great. Okay, so yeah, I have three questions, but I may not have the time for the three, so I guess you will say start. At the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned something about, if I understood correctly, you changed the places for the beds because of what you saw on the CCTV, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you, because we always mention that choice is important for the animals. So how did you define that the place, like you needed to move the beds there, or was it to sleep not on the beds you were offering?
That's a really good question as well, because it could have been potentially we were assuming they needed a mound, for a sand mound, but they might have potentially wanted to lie on the flat, for example. I think in our space, we were able to create a mound alongside the flat sand as well. So there were both. So we could see that in this instance, we had put all the sleeping mound, so fluffed up the sand only on one side. And we have a partition which allows kind of visual barrier as well as physical barrier for any submissive elephants or any elephants to choose to kind of seek refuge. But on that side, it was predominantly flat. So in that case, we were able to offer both. So she could have just gone back to lying on the flat, but we also realized there wasn't an opportunity to lie on the seemingly comfortable mound as well. So I think you're right. If there was only, if you're moving one kind of opportunity from side to side and you're taking away another choice elsewhere, we wouldn't have. It was more the addition of another opportunity, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Amazing. I have to think about that for another species, so that will help me. Then I had another question. You mentioned like the novelty effect, and we've just started to work on that with our 𝗘𝗺𝗆𝗆s. So we are very far from the elephants, but so some species are neophobic, and 𝗘𝗺𝗆s are interested in a lot of things. So that's the when you worked on that, did you find any publication that would help, like what would be the frequency to reoffer an enrichment if you want to test the novelty effect?
No, honestly, I haven't read any publications of that. In terms of that would be somewhere that me and my team have to seek that as well, definitely. But just from our experience, that is something we are new to as well. So just to share with you, I'm on the same, in terms of novelty, we haven't really explored that yet. That's where we're going to. We're at the very early stages, and what we're trying is, if something we think has been really successful before, they are the things that we've noticed we haven't evaluated for a long time. So we're currently going to just start prioritizing the evaluations on those things, like the log pile I mentioned, like hanging logs, something that we've been putting in now because a year ago we thought it was successful. So I think my advice, we're starting as well with novelty. We are going to go down the route of focusing on the things that we knew were successful, leaving them in or adding them in every day for a week, and evaluating it every day for a week. So that's where a little bit more time comes in. But there we can see maybe over a week, or if you can do longer, does the novelty wane. So that's where we're starting. It's very basic at the moment, but I understand that is new territory for us as well.
Okay, but then one step at a time. So
yeah.
That goes back to the patience list that you've done already. Like, yeah, we can pile up and then see where we're going. Okay. My last question, if I still have the time, was about the anticipatory behavior, because so I'm not sure that it's easier on elephants, but it's maybe easier to read than on other species. But how did you define that these ones, the ones you were seeing, were like negative for the welfare rather than positive? Because we know that at some point these anticipatory behaviors are useful. So
Yeah.
how did you define the balance?
Excellent. Yeah, the way we looked at it, again, I'm so sorry, it's so specific with my experience only speaking with elephants, so it may vary, but I'll share how we approached that. For 𝗘𝗺𝗆, it was this elephant in particular, she was not displaying other natural behaviours for a substantial period of the morning or night and early morning. So we were, as a team, aware that she was very clearly swaying in front of the gate, kind of only looking that direction. The others were feeding, still sleeping, engaging with each other, engaging with the substrate, and 𝗘𝗺𝗆 wasn't. So I think it was over a period of time. We noticed it happened every single morning, early morning. We as a team decided it was anticipatory and negative to or stereotypic as well, but negative to her welfare, because she was not engaging in those natural behaviors that we know she does display, but she wasn't engaging with. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Thanks. So you use the behaviors of the others and kind of compared so that you have a model. Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And just on that, also of her behaviors that we do know she does display that throughout the day and early evening. So we know she does do those things, but just in that period of the morning, she is just focused.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your questions.
Fabulous. Thank you, Emily. I'm conscious of time and your time, so we'll wrap up. There are a few extra questions in the chat, but maybe if people can email you, would that be okay? I know there's a few elephant specific questions that have come in, which I feel like maybe that would be easier on email as well. The one thing I did just want to highlight is just that all the congratulations that have come into you and your team, and actually saying how useful this is, that staff are collecting evidence before asking for change. So I will send that through to you on an email so you can see that. But yes, thank you very much to everybody for coming, and thank you, Emily, for a really great talk.